Everyone in the cafe lowered their eyes when he walked in. Everyone except the waitress who told him no. The rain outside the small downtown cafe tapped softly against the windows as customers quietly enjoyed their morning coffee, unaware that an ordinary day was about to become the beginning of a story no one would forget. Alexander Reed entered the cafe with the presence of a man who was used to being recognized before he even spoke. At 46 years old, the Korean Mafia boss had built a reputation around discipline, influence, and control. People around him carefully chose their words. Employees stood straighter. Strangers moved aside. His name carried a weight that opened doors before he ever reached them. But inside this small cafe, one person did not react the way everyone expected. Olivia Carter, a 28-year-old black waitress, looked at him calmly from behind the counter. She did not know the stories people whispered about him. She did not care about expensive suits, powerful connections, or the way others changed their behavior when he entered a room. She only saw a customer whose actions did not match the respect every person deserved. Earlier that morning, Olivia had watched as Alexander spoke impatiently to an elderly customer who was struggling to explain a simple request. The other employees stayed silent because they recognized him. They knew his reputation. But Olivia saw something different. She saw someone who had forgotten that respect was something given to everyone, not only those with influence. When Alexander approached the counter, expecting the usual treatment, Olivia placed the menu in front of him and calmly said, "I am sorry, but I cannot serve someone who believes kindness only belongs to certain people." The cafe went completely silent. A few customers looked away, shocked that anyone would speak to him that way. The other employees froze, wondering what would happen next. But Olivia remained steady. Her voice was respectful, not angry. She was not trying to embarrass him. She was simply standing by what she believed was right. Alexander stared at her, surprised by something he had not felt in years. It was not anger. It was curiosity. Everyone around him usually wanted something from him. They wanted favors, opportunities, or approval. But this young waitress wanted nothing. She was not impressed by his status. She was not afraid of his reputation. She was simply asking him to remember the value of treating people with dignity. Alexander quietly left the cafe that morning, but the moment stayed with him. For the first time in a long time, someone had looked past the power, the money, and the image everyone else saw. Simeone had challenged the person behind the reputation. Olivia thought the encounter was over. She returned to her work, unaware that her simple decision had reached someone who rarely questioned himself. And she had no idea that the next morning, the quiet cafe would become the center of attention when 10 black SUVs arrived outside its doors. The next morning, the quiet streets around the small cafe looked completely different. Before the first customers arrived, 10 black SUVs slowly stopped along the road, creating a scene that made everyone nearby wonder what was happening. The cafe employees looked through the windows with nervous expressions, remembering the powerful man who had walked away the day before. Olivia Carter stood behind the counter, preparing coffee as usual. She noticed the vehicles, but she did not let fear control her. She had not done anything wrong. She had simply spoken honestly. Inside the first SUV, Alexander Reed sat quietly, looking toward the cafe entrance. The previous day's encounter continued to stay in his thoughts. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who carefully avoided disagreeing with him. He was used to seeing hesitation in people's eyes, not honesty. But Olivia had been different. She had not insulted him. She had not tried to challenge his authority. She had simply reminded him of something he had forgotten. Respect was not created by status. It was created by how someone treated others. Alexander stepped out of the vehicle and entered the cafe. The room became silent once again. Customers watched carefully, expecting a confrontation. Olivia looked up and recognized him immediately. Her expression remained calm. She placed the coffee cup she was holding on the counter and waited. Alexander looked around the cafe, noticing the same simple tables, the warm lights, and the ordinary people who had witnessed the moment that made him think differently. He approached Olivia, but instead of demanding an explanation, he asked a question. "Why did you say that to me yesterday?" Olivia looked at him for a moment before answering. She explained that she did not know who he was when she spoke to him. Even if she had known, she would have felt the same. She believed every person deserved basic respect, whether they were wealthy, powerful, or simply trying to get through an ordinary day. Alexander listened carefully. He expected many things from people, but he did not expect sincerity without a hidden purpose. Olivia was not asking for anything. She was not trying to gain attention. She was simply being honest. The customers slowly realized that the situation was not what they expected. The powerful man who arrived with a large group of vehicles was not there to intimidate anyone. He was there because one person's words had made him reflect on himself. Alexander looked at the cafe and saw something he had overlooked for years. In his world, people often focused on what someone owned, who they knew, or what influence they carried. But Olivia had reminded him that character could not be measured by those things. Before leaving, Alexander thanked her for being honest with him. It was a simple sentence, but for a man who rarely admitted he needed to learn something, it meant more than anyone realized. Olivia returned to her work, believing the moment had passed. But Alexander walked away knowing that the waitress in the small cafe had done something far more significant than refusing a customer. She had made a powerful man stop and question the way he saw the world. After the unexpected visit to the cafe, Alexander Reed found himself thinking about Olivia Carter more than he wanted to admit. It was not because she had challenged him. It was because she had done something far more unusual. She had treated him like an ordinary person. In a world where everyone carefully measured their words. Around him, Olivia had spoken with honesty and without fear. For Alexander, that simple interaction became something he could not ignore. The following days moved as usual for everyone else, but for him, something had changed. He began noticing details he had overlooked before. He noticed how often people around him agreed with him simply because of his position. He noticed how rarely anyone offered a genuine opinion. For years, he believed loyalty meant people would always support his decisions. Now, he started wondering if some people were only protecting their own interests. Meanwhile, Olivia continued her normal routine at the cafe. She arrived early every morning, prepared the tables, greeted customers, and worked hard without expecting recognition. She had no idea that the man she had confronted was paying attention to the way she lived her life. To Olivia, kindness was not something special, it was simply the way she believed people should treat one another. One afternoon, Alexander returned to the cafe alone. This time, he did not arrive surrounded by attention. He walked through the door quietly and sat at a small table near the window. Olivia noticed him but continued serving other customers before approaching him. When she finally reached his table, Alexander asked her about something that had been on his mind. He wanted to understand why she cared so much about treating strangers with respect. Olivia looked toward the busy cafe and explained that everyone carried something others could not see. Some people carried worries. Some carried responsibilities. Some carried pain from experiences they never talked about. She believed a small moment of kindness could remind someone that they were not invisible. Alexander listened in silence. Those words affected him because they revealed something he had forgotten. He had spent years focusing on protecting his family, his reputation, and everything he had built. But he rarely stopped to consider the people around him who quietly carried their own struggles. Olivia did not know it, but her perspective was changing the way he viewed leadership. Later that evening, Alexander met with the people close to him. They noticed he was different. He asked more questions. He listened longer. He considered opinions he might have ignored before. Some people were surprised because they had never seen him slow down and reflect this way. Alexander did not explain everything, but deep inside, he knew where the change began. It started with a waitress who had nothing to gain by challenging him. Olivia had not tried to impress him. She had not wanted his attention. She had simply stood by what she believed was right. And that was exactly what made her impossible for him to forget. For the first time in many years, Alexander realized that the strongest influence was not always the person with the most power. Sometimes, it was the person who quietly reminded others what truly mattered. The days after Alexander Reed began visiting the cafe more often, the people around him started noticing something unusual. The powerful man who once made decisions quickly and expected everyone to follow without question had become more thoughtful. He listened longer during meetings. He considered different opinions. He even started remembering the names of people who worked around him. To everyone else, the changes seemed small. But for those who knew Alexander well, they were impossible to ignore. The reason behind those changes remained connected to one person he had met in a simple cafe. Olivia Carter continued living her life the same way she always had. She did not treat Alexander differently because of his wealth or influence. When he entered the cafe, he was still just another customer to her. That was something Alexander respected more than he expected. One afternoon, a misunderstanding inside the cafe revealed exactly why Olivia was different. A regular customer became frustrated over a small mistake with an order and began speaking harshly to one of the younger employees. The room became uncomfortable as everyone looked away, hoping someone else would handle the situation. Olivia calmly stepped forward. She did not raise her voice or create a scene. She simply reminded the customer that everyone deserved patience and respect. Her words were polite, but they carried confidence. The situation ended peacefully, and the young employee thanked her quietly. Alexander happened to witness the moment from a nearby table. He realized Olivia did not stand up for people because she wanted attention. She did it because she believed it was the right thing to do. That evening, Alexander thought about how different her world was from his own. In his life, problems were often solved through influence, connections, and authority. Olivia solved problems through empathy and understanding. Neither approach was familiar to the other, but somehow they were teaching each other something important. Later, Alexander invited his mother Eleanor to visit the cafe again. He wanted her to see the person who had changed the way he looked at people. When Eleanor met Olivia, she immediately understood why her son respected the young waitress. Olivia treated Eleanor with the same warmth she gave every other customer. There was no special behavior because of the family name. There was only genuine kindness. As they sat together, Eleanor noticed something in Alexander that she had not seen for years. He seemed calmer. More open. More human. She realized Olivia had not changed him by demanding anything from him. She had changed him simply by showing him another way to see the world. Alexander looked across the cafe and understood something important. Olivia had no interest in his power, his reputation, or his resources. She had only cared about one thing from the beginning, treating people with dignity. And that was the reason he could not stop respecting her. The man who had spent years surrounded by people trying to impress him had finally met someone who only wanted him to become better. The connection between Alexander Reed and Olivia Carter continued to grow in a way that surprised everyone around them. It was not built on wealth, influence, or expectations. It was built on small moments that revealed the kind of people they truly were. Alexander, a man who had spent years surrounded by people who carefully chose every word around him, found himself appreciating conversations where nobody was trying to gain anything from him. Olivia, on the other hand, never saw him as someone untouchable. She saw a person who was still learning, still changing, and still capable of becoming better. One evening, Alexander invited Olivia to a quiet dinner with his family. He wanted her to meet the people closest to him, but he also wanted his family to understand why this ordinary cafe worker had made such an extraordinary impact on him. When Olivia arrived, she immediately felt the difference between her world and theirs. The large house, elegant decorations, and formal atmosphere were unfamiliar. For a moment, she wondered if she truly belonged there. But Eleanor welcomed her warmly, reminding her that a person's value was never determined by the size of their home or the amount of money they had. During dinner, some family members quietly questioned why Alexander respected Olivia so much. They struggled to understand how someone with no powerful connections could influence a man who had spent years building an empire. They saw her simple clothing and ordinary background before they saw her character. Olivia noticed their hesitation but remained calm. She did not try to prove herself. She did not change who she was to earn their approval. She simply answered questions honestly and treated everyone with the same respect she always showed. Alexander watched carefully. He realized this was exactly what made Olivia different. She did not enter a room trying to become important. She entered a room already knowing her own worth. As the evening continued, Eleanor shared a story about the day Olivia helped her at the cafe. She explained how Olivia offered kindness without knowing her family name, her background, or her position. She did not help because she expected something in return. She helped because she believed everyone deserved compassion. The room became quiet as the family members listened. They began seeing Olivia differently. She was not just a waitress from a small cafe. She was someone who carried a strength that could not be bought or inherited. Later that night, Alexander walked Olivia outside and thanked her for coming. He admitted that many people in his life respected his position, but very few ever challenged him to become a better person. Olivia smiled and told him that change was always a choice. Nobody was defined only by their past decisions. Those words stayed with Alexander. For the first time, he understood that true leadership was not about making people follow him. It was about becoming someone worthy of their trust. And as Olivia walked away into the quiet evening, Alexander realized that the person who had entered his life without power or status had given him something far more valuable than anything money could provide, a reason to see the world differently. After the dinner with Alexander and his family, something inside him continued to change. The powerful man who once believed every problem could be solved through influence and control was beginning to understand a different kind of strength. Olivia Carter had never tried to teach him a lesson. She had never spoken to him as if she knew more than him. She simply lived according to her values, and that quiet example had become impossible for him to ignore. In the days that followed, Alexander started paying closer attention to the people around him. He noticed the employees who arrived early and stayed late. He noticed the individuals who worked hard without expecting recognition. He noticed the small acts of kindness that often went unseen because nobody considered them important. Before meeting Olivia, he rarely stopped to appreciate those moments. Now, they stood out everywhere. Meanwhile, Olivia continued her life at the cafe. She never expected Alexander to become part of her world. She never imagined that a single conversation would influence someone with so much power. To her, she had simply defended what she believed was right. She continued serving customers, helping co-workers, and maintaining the same patience she had always shown. One afternoon, Alexander visited the cafe during a busy period. Instead of sitting apart and observing, he noticed a new employee struggling to handle the rush of customers. In the past, he might have ignored the situation because it seemed unimportant. But this time, he stepped forward and offered assistance. The cafe employees looked surprised. They had never seen someone like Alexander take interest in such ordinary moments. Olivia noticed the change but did not make a big announcement about it. She simply smiled because she understood that real growth often happened quietly. Later that day, Alexander asked Olivia why she never seemed impressed by his position. Many people around him treated his success as something that made him different from everyone else. Olivia explained that success was something to respect, but it was not the only thing that defined a person. She believed character was revealed through choices, especially when nobody was watching. Alexander thought about those words for a long time. He realized that he had spent years building a reputation that made people admire him, but he had not always built relationships where people felt comfortable being honest with him. Olivia had shown him that respect was not the same as distance. A person could be respected and still be approachable. They could be powerful and still be kind. As weeks passed, people close to Alexander began noticing the difference. He became more thoughtful in meetings. He considered how his decisions affected others. He started valuing honesty more than agreement. These changes did not make him weaker. They made him more complete. Olivia had not changed him by giving him instructions. She changed him by reminding him of something he had forgotten. Behind every position, every title, and every achievement was a person who wanted to be understood. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt like he was finally seeing the world clearly. Alexander Reed had spent years building a world where every decision carried weight and every person around him understood the importance of his position. But now, for the first time, he was beginning to understand that leadership was not only about making decisions. It was about understanding the people affected by those decisions. The lesson did not come from a business meeting or from someone within his powerful circle. It came from Olivia Carter, a black waitress who had never tried to impress him. She had simply reminded him that every person deserved to be seen. As Alexander continued visiting the cafe, the people around him started noticing the difference. The employees who once expected a distant and serious man began seeing someone who listened more carefully. The customers who recognized him no longer saw only his reputation. They saw a person who was learning to connect with others. One morning, Alexander arrived at the cafe and noticed Olivia helping an elderly customer who was having difficulty carrying several bags. She did not hesitate or wait for someone else to step in. She simply offered assistance with a smile. Alexander watched quietly and realized that this was who Olivia had always been. Her kindness was not something she showed because someone important was watching. It was part of her character. Later, Alexander asked Olivia why she continued helping people when many of them would never know her name or understand what she had done. Olivia answered that kindness was never about being remembered. It was about making sure someone felt valued in a moment when they needed it. Those words stayed with Alexander. In his world, recognition often came with achievements, titles, and public success. Olivia showed him that some of the most meaningful actions happened without applause. However, not everyone around Alexander understood his growing respect for Olivia. Some people in his circle believed someone from a simple cafe could never truly understand the responsibilities of his life. They judged her by her job instead of her character. Alexander noticed those opinions, but this time he did not ignore them. He remembered how often people had been underestimated simply because others refused to look deeper. For years, Alexander had experienced the opposite. People focused on his power before they saw him as a person. Now he understood both sides of that experience. One evening, Alexander visited the cafe after closing hours. The quiet atmosphere gave him a chance to speak openly with Olivia. He admitted that meeting her had changed the way he looked at the world. He explained that he used to believe respect came from being powerful enough that people had no choice but to listen. Olivia told him that true respect came when people listened because they trusted the person speaking. Alexander carried those words with him. They became a reminder that the strongest leaders were not those who created distance between themselves and others. They were the ones who understood the value of every person around them. And the woman who once stood behind a cafe counter had become the person who helped a powerful man rediscover the importance of humility. The bond between Alexander Reed and Olivia Carter had reached a point where even the people around them could feel the difference. What began as a simple disagreement inside a small cafe had become a journey that changed the way Alexander viewed respect, leadership, and the people around him. The man who once believed power created influence was learning that trust was something earned through actions, not demanded through reputation. As time passed, Alexander decided it was time for the people closest to him to understand why Olivia mattered. He invited her to another gathering with his family, not because he wanted to display his connection with her, but because he wanted them to see the person he had come to respect. When Olivia arrived at the elegant home, she immediately noticed the contrast between her everyday life and the world Alexander lived in. The polished floors, expensive decorations, and quiet atmosphere reflected a life far removed from her small cafe. For a moment, she wondered if she truly belonged in that place. But Eleanor welcomed her with the same warmth she had shown from the beginning. She reminded Olivia that kindness did not need an expensive setting to be valuable. It only needed a genuine heart. During the gathering, some members of Alexander's circle struggled to understand why he respected Olivia so deeply. They saw a waitress from a neighborhood cafe and wondered what someone like her could possibly teach a man like Alexander. Their mistake was judging her by her position instead of her character. Olivia did not try to defend herself or prove that she deserved to be there. She simply remained the same person she had always been. She answered questions honestly, listened carefully, and treated everyone with the same respect she offered. Strangers every day. Alexander watched as the room slowly changed. He saw people who were focused on status begin to notice something more important. They saw Olivia's patience, her confidence, and the quiet strength behind her kindness. They realized she had influenced Alexander not because she had power, but because she had something power could never create. She had authenticity. Later that evening, Alexander spoke with Olivia privately. He thanked her for showing him a different way to see the world. He admitted that many people around him respected his position, but few people ever challenged him to become better. Olivia smiled and told him that everyone had the ability to grow, regardless of their past. She believed people were defined by the choices they made when they had the opportunity to do better. Alexander looked back at the journey that brought them together. He remembered the moment she refused to simply follow what everyone else did at the time. He thought she was challenging his authority. Now he understood she was reminding him of his responsibility. She had shown him that real strength was not about making others feel small. It was about having enough humility to recognize value in others. As the evening ended, Alexander realized something that would stay with him forever. The woman who had once stood behind a cafe counter had changed his entire perspective without asking for anything in return. She never wanted his influence. She never wanted his wealth. She only wanted people to remember that every person deserved dignity. And that simple truth became the greatest lesson a powerful man had ever learned. Months had passed since the day Olivia Carter stood behind the cafe counter and refused to ignore what she believed was wrong. At the time, she never imagined that a simple decision would change the heart of one of the most powerful men in the city. Alexander Reed had entered that cafe expecting the world to respond the way it always had. He expected attention, caution, and silent agreement. Instead, he met someone who reminded him that every person deserved respect, no matter their position. The change in Alexander was now visible to everyone around him. The people who worked with him noticed that he no longer measured every conversation by influence or advantage. He listened more carefully. He considered the thoughts of others. He understood that leadership was not about standing above people, but about understanding them. Yet the person who noticed the change the most was Olivia. She saw that Alexander was not trying to become someone different for appearances. He was making a genuine effort to become better. One quiet morning at the cafe, Alexander sat near the same window where he had first reflected on Olivia's words. The sunlight filled the room, customers talked softly, and everything felt ordinary. But to Alexander, the place represented one of the most important turning points of his life. He looked around and realized that the small cafe had taught him lessons that years of power and success never could. Olivia approached his table with his usual coffee and smiled. She asked him if he ever thought that one conversation could create such a change. Alexander looked at the familiar surroundings and admitted that he never expected it. He told her that before meeting her, he believed respect came from being powerful enough that people had no choice but to listen. But now he understood that true respect came when people listened because they trusted and valued the person speaking. Olivia smiled and reminded him that the best changes often begin with a single choice. A choice to be kinder. A choice to listen. A choice to see people as human beings instead of their titles or circumstances. Alexander carried those words with him for the rest of his life. He continued to lead with confidence, but he also led with compassion. He never forgot the lesson from the woman who had no wealth, no influence, and no reason to impress him. She had shown him that a person's true value was never determined by what they owned or how many people knew their name. It was revealed through the way they treated others when nobody was watching. Olivia remained the same person she had always been. She continued working at the cafe, helping customers, supporting her co-workers, and choosing kindness every day. She never needed recognition because she already understood something many people spent their entire lives searching for. A person did not need power to make a difference. Sometimes, the smallest act of courage could reach someone who had everything except the understanding they needed. And in the end, the most powerful lesson Alexander Reed ever learned came from the person everyone else overlooked. The woman behind the cafe counter showed him that dignity could not be bought, respect could not be demanded, and true strength was always found in humility.